Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. Mike Reynolds is in the kitchen carving a turkey, the blade of his knife gleaming in the light. The aroma of Thanksgiving dinner fills the house, the flavors of roast turkey, pumpkin pie, and cranberry sauce mixing together to create a warm and festive atmosphere. It's one of the family's biggest traditions of the year, and Sarah always invites her parents over, while Mike's brother, Alex, brings his new girlfriend. But this year's Thanksgiving was destined to be unusual. Mike's hand paused for a second on the handle of his knife, thinking back to the night 3 months ago that changed everything. Back then, he'd been a trusting husband to his wife, an electrical engineer with Midwest Electric Company for 12 years, a man who considered his 15-year marriage uneventful but solid. That Tuesday night, Mike left work early from the office. He had just finished designing the electrical system for a large commercial building, and the client was so pleased with his work that he wanted to share the good news with Sarah. Maybe they could go to that new Italian restaurant to celebrate, or simply open a bottle of wine at home and talk about future plans like they did when they first got married. Mike quietly opened the front door, wanting to surprise Sarah. The house was quiet. The TV wasn't on in the living room, and there was no sound of dinner being prepared in the kitchen. He thought Sarah might be upstairs resting or working in her small study. Sarah worked part-time as an accountant at the local community college and often had to do some paperwork around the house. As Mike walked toward the stairs, he heard voices coming from upstairs. Not Sarah's voice alone, but two people talking softly. Mike's first thought was that it might be Sarah on the phone with a friend, but as he approached the stairs, he realized that the voice was in their bedroom. Mike stood at the bottom of the stairs, his hand gripping the railing. His heart began to pound violently, and a feeling of fear he had never experienced before came over him. The man's voice sounded familiar, but he couldn't immediately recognize it over the sound of blood pounding against his eardrums. The voices upstairs became clearer, and Mike heard Sarah's laughter, the kind of light-hearted laugh he hadn't heard in a long time. Then a man's voice, low and soft, speaking words Mike couldn't quite make out. Mike felt a twinge in his stomach. He wanted to rush up the stairs, push open the bedroom door, and confront what was happening. But reason told him to calm down, to think. If he acted rashly, he might complicate things. He quietly exited the house and sat in his car for a full hour thinking. His brain analyzed the situation like a complex circuit diagram. Who could Sarah possibly be with? Why was she in their bedroom? How long had this been going on? When Mike re-entered the house, it was quiet upstairs. Sarah was in the kitchen preparing dinner, wearing her favorite apron and looking like any normal weekday evening. Her hair was a little messy, but she always looked a little bushy after a busy day. Her cheeks were slightly flushed, but that could have been from the heat in the kitchen. "You're home early," Sarah said, not looking Mike directly in the eye. Her voice sounded normal, but Mike noticed that her hands were shaking a little as she chopped the onions. "The meeting ended early," Mike replied, watching Sarah's expression carefully. He wanted to look for any sign of abnormality, anything that might confirm the finer details of his suspicions. Sarah nodded and continued her cooking. "How was your day?" "Very good. The Peterson project got final approval." "Great," Sarah said, but her tone lacked real excitement. Normally, she would have turned and hugged him, asking for more details. But today, she just continued chopping onions and turned her back on Mike. That night, Sarah was acting particularly affectionate. She took the initiative to approach Mike, asking him about his work and talking about their weekend plans. She even suggests watching an old movie that they both like. This erratic behavior reinforces Mike's belief that his suspicions are correct. Over the next few days, Mike begins to notice details he had previously overlooked. Sarah's cell phone is now always placed face down, and when it rings, she quickly checks the screen before deciding whether or not to answer it. She began going out more frequently, always for valid reasons: to have coffee with her friend Linda, to go to a new yoga class, to buy supplies for an upcoming community event. Mike is a meticulous person, a trait that has made him very successful in the electrical engineering field. He is used to analyzing complex systems and getting to the root of the problem. Now, he began to approach this personal crisis as if it were a technical problem. He began to record Sarah's behavioral patterns. When she left the house, where she went, and when she returned. He noticed subtle changes in her clothing as well. Sarah had always been very conscious of her appearance, but now she seemed to dress more carefully, even if it was just to go to the grocery store. She started wearing a new perfume and purchased some clothes that Mike had never seen before. After 2 weeks, Mike decides to take action. He purchased a small GPS tracker, the kind of device car dealers use to track rental vehicles. He installs the device in Sarah's car, hidden in the spare tire compartment. The tracking data showed that Sarah did go where she said she would: the supermarket, the yoga studio, a friend's house. But she also went to places she never mentioned. The most frequent of these was a residential neighborhood on the east side of the city, a place Mike had never been. Mike started checking the home phone records when Sarah was out. Over the past few weeks, one number has come up repeatedly, usually while Mike is at work. When he dialed the number, he heard a familiar voice leave a message. "Hello, this is Alex. I'm not in right now. Please leave a message." Alex Reynolds, Mike's brother, 3 years younger than Mike, owns a small construction company, has been divorced twice, and is now single. They grew up together and have always been close. Alex was a frequent visitor to their house and had a great rapport with Sarah. Too cordial, Mike now realized. Mike felt an anger burning in his chest like never before. This wasn't just any betrayal. This was a double betrayal. The two people closest to him, the two people he trusted most, were carrying on a secret relationship behind his back. But Mike didn't act immediately. He needed more evidence, hard confirmation. He began to investigate more systematically. Mike purchased a professional-grade recording device and installed it in Sarah's car. He installed several hidden cameras in his home, claiming they were for home security. Sarah didn't object and even said it was a good idea. The recording devices soon provide the evidence Mike needs. Sarah called Alex from her car, and their conversation was intimate and full of innuendo. "I miss you," Sarah said in one of the recordings. "Last night was so good." "I missed you too," Alex replies. "We can't sneak around like this anymore." "I know, but we need to be careful." "Mike can't know, at least not yet." "Why can't we just tell him?" "Because he'll destroy us." "You don't know your brother, Alex. He seems calm, but when he's hurt, he can be very dangerous." Mike felt a strange sense of pride as he heard the recording. Sarah was right. She didn't really know her husband. Over the next few weeks, Mike gathered more evidence. He discovers email exchanges between Sarah and Alex that date back 6 months. At first, they're innocuous, about arrangements for family gatherings or Mike's birthday surprise. But over time, they became more personal and intimate. Mike also noticed some financial anomalies. Sarah withdrew several sums of money from their joint savings account, claiming they were for family expenses. But Mike was unable to find records of these expenses. When he tracks these withdrawals, he discovers that some of the money was deposited into Alex's personal account. This is not just an emotional affair. It's a sophisticated scam involving money. Mike begins to dig deeper into Alex's finances. He discovers that his brother's construction company has run into serious financial problems over the past year. Several large clients are behind on payments, and some projects have been canceled due to the recession. Alex is facing possible bankruptcy, and his personal debt is mounting. This explains a lot. For Alex, Sarah is more than just a romantic interest. She represents financial stability. Mike and Sarah own a $350,000 house with sizable savings, as well as Mike's steady income as an engineer. If Alex can convince Sarah to leave Mike, he will be able to acquire some of these assets. Mike begins to formulate a plan to fight back. He doesn't want to simply expose their relationship. He wants to destroy them completely. They betrayed him, and now they will suffer the consequences. First, Mike begins working with a private investigator. Jessica Martinez is a former police officer who now specializes in marital infidelity cases. She has experience obtaining quality evidence and knows how to make sure it's admissible in court. "Your case is complicated," Jessica said during their first meeting. "Betrayal between family members is always more painful and harder to deal with." "I don't just want a divorce," Mike tells her. "I want real consequences for what they've done." Jessica studied the prima facie evidence Mike provided. "You've done a good job," she said. "But we need more. Photos, videos, more recordings. If you want to gain an advantage in a divorce proceeding, you need incontrovertible evidence." Over the next few weeks, Jessica and Mike worked together to gather more evidence. Jessica had specialized surveillance equipment and was able to obtain clearer photos and recordings. She followed Sarah and Alex to the locations of their secret meetings and recorded their every interaction. Meanwhile, Mike begins to perform subtle psychological operations in the house. He'll move Sarah's personal belongings to make her doubt her memories. He'll delete some of the messages on her cell phone and pretend he doesn't know anything about them. He would change small details around the house, such as adjusting the angle of the mirror or putting her keys in a different place. At first, Sarah didn't notice the changes. But as these small disturbances accumulated, she began to become anxious and upset. "I think I've been forgetful lately," Sarah told Mike one night. "I can't always find things or remember where I put them." "Maybe you're stressed out," Mike replied, putting on a concerned expression. "Something at work?" "Maybe. There's been a lot going on in my head lately." Mike knew what was occupying her thoughts. The stress of maintaining a lie, the burden of hiding a secret relationship, and the possible guilt. He's slowly undermining her mental defenses, making her more vulnerable and mistake-prone. At the same time, Mike begins to put pressure on Alex. He would mention Alex's financial difficulties at family gatherings, asking him about his business with feigned concern. He would mention his stable relationship with Sarah and talk about their future plans. These topics clearly made Alex uncomfortable. "You seem stressed lately," Mike said to Alex at a weekend party. "Stressed about business?" "Yes, some clients are late with payments," Alex replied, avoiding direct eye contact. "If you need help, you know you can come to me," Mike said. "We're brothers. We should support each other." Alex's expression became more unnatural. "Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it." Mike could see Alex's guilt growing. Every time they met, Alex seemed more upset and nervous. Mike knew that this pressure would eventually cause Alex to make mistakes. In mid-October, Mike decided to up the pressure. He began to hint that he knew something, but didn't specify. "I've been thinking a lot about our relationship lately," Mike said to Sarah one evening. They were sitting in the living room. Sarah was watching TV, and Mike was reading an engineering magazine. Sarah looked up with a slightly wary expression. "What do you mean?" "Our marriage. I think something's not right." Sarah's face turned pale. "I don't understand what you're talking about." "Maybe it's my imagination," Mike said, then pretended to go back to his magazine. "It's just a feeling, like something is changing." Those words had the desired effect. Sarah began to act more nervous, and her contact with Alex became more cautious. Mike noticed through the surveillance equipment that they were now communicating primarily through encrypted messaging apps, rather than calling or emailing. But this caution also makes them more predictable. Mike began to be able to predict their behavioral patterns, knowing when they would meet and where. In early November, Mike obtained the decisive evidence he needed. Jessica's surveillance equipment captured video of Sarah and Alex at a hotel where they were clearly not discussing family matters. The videos were high quality and could not be denied or misinterpreted. Mike also found more financial evidence. Sarah wasn't just withdrawing money from their joint account to give to Alex. She was using their credit cards to pay for Alex's personal expenses. Restaurant bills, hotel rooms, and even some expensive gifts were paid for with Mike's money. Now Mike has enough evidence to destroy Sarah and Alex. But he's not ready to take action. He wants to wait for the perfect moment, one that will maximize their humiliation and pain. Thanksgiving gave him that chance. "Dad, can you help me with the stuff in the pantry?" Mike's memories were interrupted by the sudden appearance of his 16-year-old son, Tommy, in the kitchen. Tommy is Mike and Sarah's only child, an intelligent and sensitive child. Over the past few months, Mike has noticed a change in Tommy's behavior as well. He has become quieter and more observant. Mike suspects that Tommy may also be sensing tension in the house. "What is it?" Mike asked, lowering the knife in his hand. "Some holiday decorations. Mom said she forgot to take them out of the pantry." Mike noticed something strange in Tommy's expression, a tension in his eyes that Mike had never seen before. "Now?" Mike asked. "The guests will be arriving soon." "Yes, now?" Sarah said she needs them to set the table. Mike also noticed that Tommy didn't call Sarah Mom, as he usually did, but called her by her first name. That was unusual. "Okay," Mike said. "Lead the way." They walked toward the storage room, Tommy's steps looking a little hurried. Located at the back of the house, the pantry was a small, crowded space filled with holiday decorations, old clothes, and other miscellaneous items. As they reached the door to the storage room, Mike heard the front door open, followed by footsteps and Sarah's voice. "Tommy, where are you?" "Upstairs," Tommy replied loudly, but he was actually right next to Mike. Mike was beginning to realize that this wasn't a simple fetch mission. Tommy knew something, and he was trying to protect his father. "Tommy, it's dark in here." Mike said as they entered the storage room. What happened? Mike started to ask his son. Chill. Be quiet. Tommy hissed, then closed the door to the storage room. There were footsteps in the hallway, and then Sarah's voice, sweeter than usual. I thought you weren't coming. A man's voice responded. How could I miss it? Especially on Thanksgiving. Mike's heart almost stopped beating. That voice wasn't the voice he was expecting. It wasn't Alex's voice. It was a voice Mike recognized, but didn't expect. Dad. Tommy whispered in the darkness. I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to tell you. Mike felt the world spinning around him. His brain struggled to process what was happening. If that wasn't Alex, then who was it? How long have you known? Mike asked in a whisper. 2 months, Tommy replied. I came home early from school one day sick and heard noises upstairs. I thought it was a maintenance worker, but then I heard Mom laughing, the kind of laugh she hasn't made at you in a long time. Mike closed his eyes and tried to control his breathing. In the darkness, he could hear the voices in the living room becoming clearer. We can't go on like this, Sarah said. It's too hard. Always have to be careful when Mike isn't home. I know, the man replied. But we need to be patient. This kind of thing takes time. Mike still couldn't recognize the voice. It sounded familiar, but in his shock he couldn't place who it was. I want to be with you, Sarah continued. Really be together. I'm tired of pretending I still love Mike. Soon, the man replied. We just need to find the right time. Mike clenches his fists in the darkness. Hearing Sarah express her distaste for him so directly was more painful than he'd expected. Are you sure he won't get suspicious? The man asked. Mike's too focused on his work, Sarah replies. He never pays attention to what I'm doing. Besides, he's too trusting. He never suspected I would betray him. It makes things easy for us, the man said. But we still need to be careful. Mike heard sounds of movement, then more intimate sounds. His wife and this mysterious man were in their living room just before Thanksgiving dinner. Dad, Tommy whispered in the darkness. What should we do? Mike looked at his son in the darkness, even though he couldn't actually see him. But he could feel Tommy's presence, his loyalty, his anger. We wait, Mike whispered. Let them think no one knows. For the next 20 minutes, Mike and Tommy listened to the voices in the living room from the storage room. The intimate conversation between Mike's wife and this mysterious man echoed in his ears, each word cutting like a knife. But Mike was also thinking. He had thought Sarah was having an affair with Alex, but apparently he was wrong. This revelation complicates his plan for revenge, but it also makes it more interesting. Eventually, the voices stopped and they heard the front door close. He's gone, Tommy said. Can't get out yet, Mike replied. We need to give Sarah time to sort herself out. It was another 10 minutes before Mike opened the pantry door. They walked out and pretended nothing had happened. Sarah was in the living room, looking completely normal. Her hair was perfectly combed and her makeup was flawless. When she saw Mike and Tommy, she broke into a huge smile. What did you guys find in the storage room? She asked. Some decorations, Mike replied, watching her expression carefully. Have you had any guests? Sarah's expression didn't change, but Mike noticed her fingers trembling slightly. No, she said. Why do you ask? I thought I heard a noise, Mike said. It could have been the next door neighbor, Sarah replied. You know Mr. Johnson always works in the backyard. Mike nodded, pretending to accept the explanation. But now he knew what a skilled liar Sarah was. That night, when the real Thanksgiving guests arrived, Mike behaved as usual. He chatted with Sarah's parents, discussed school with Tommy, and enjoyed a traditional Thanksgiving dinner. But throughout the evening, his mind was analyzing the voice he heard in the pantry. Who was that man? How long had their relationship lasted? Why hadn't Mike noticed any signs before? In the evening, when the guests leave, Mike begins his investigation. He checks Sarah's cell phone, using the password she usually uses, Tommy's birthday. But the phone is locked and she changes the password. Mike turns to his computer and begins to look deeper into Sarah's digital footprint. He discovers a social media account he's never seen before, using her maiden name. There was very little activity on this account, but Mike found some interesting information. For the past few months, Sarah has been interacting with someone named David Chun. David is a 42-year-old divorced man who works at the local university as the associate dean of the athletic department. He has 2 children, seems attractive, and frequently posts about fitness and healthy living. Mike scrutinizes David's social media profiles. He finds photos that show David at various social events. including some people Mike doesn't recognize. But in one of the photos, Mike sees a familiar figure, Sarah, standing in the background of the crowd. The photo was dated 3 months ago, just as Mike begins to suspect that Sarah is having an affair. Mike continues his investigation and finds more evidence. Sarah's credit card records show that she has made several purchases in the past few months at restaurants near the university where David works. She also purchased some gifts at an expensive men's clothing store that were clearly not for Mike. Now Mike knows the truth. Sarah's affair was not with Alex, but with David Chun. This revelation complicates his revenge plan, but it also gives him new opportunities. Mike begins to formulate a new plan, one that is more elaborate and destructive. Mike spends the next 2 weeks retooling his revenge plan. Discovering that Sarah's affair was with David Chun instead of Alex complicates the whole situation, but also gives Mike more opportunities to destroy her with precision. First, Mike needs more information about David Chun. He can't rely on what he knows about Alex anymore. He needs to research this stranger from scratch. Mike starts working like a professional detective. He researched David's background and found some interesting information. David does work at the local university, but his position is not as stable as he presents it on social media. He's recently been investigated by Human Resources for some undisclosed behavioral issues, and his contract is about to expire, with the prospect of renewal uncertain. More importantly, Mike discovers that David has a complicated personal history. Both of his divorces involved allegations of infidelity, and his ex-wives accused him of being a habitual liar. One of the ex-wives claimed in the divorce proceedings that David had a pattern. He would seek out married women, convince them to leave their husbands, and then look for new targets once the relationship had stabilized. This discovery made Mike realize that Sarah hadn't just betrayed her husband. She was being manipulated by a professional predator. This realization doesn't diminish Mike's anger. On the contrary, it makes him angrier. Sarah has chosen someone who will ultimately abandon her. Mike begins to develop a 3-phase plan for revenge. Phase 1. Gather incontrovertible evidence. Mike needs photos, videos, audio recordings, and documents that prove Sarah's relationship with David and Sarah's misuse of family assets. Phase 2. Destroy Sarah and David's relationship. Mike plans to use David's history and personality weaknesses to show Sarah who David really is. Phase 3. Public shaming and legal consequences. Mike plans to expose Sarah's betrayal in a public forum and then secure financial and social consequences for her actions through divorce proceedings. Mike begins to execute Phase 1. He reconnects with Jessica, the private investigator, and tells her new information about David. This changes a lot of things, Jessica says. If your wife is with someone with this history, we may need to warn her. No, Mike said firmly. She made her choice. Now she needs to live with the consequences. Jessica looked a little perturbed, but she agreed to continue the investigation. Over the next few weeks, she gathered a great deal of evidence. Photographs showed Sarah and David in a variety of intimate settings. Audio recordings captured their private conversations, and bank records showed David-related expenses that Sarah had paid for with family funds. The most shocking revelation was that Sarah had begun discussing the possibility of divorcing Mike. In one recording, she told David that she was thinking about ending the marriage and asked if David would like to move on to the next stage. David's response was typical. We need to make sure the timing is right. These things need to be handled carefully. Mike realizes that David is not giving Sarah any real commitment. He was playing with her emotions, keeping her hopes up, but never really committing to a shared future. This gives Mike the inspiration for the second phase of his plan. Mike begins to execute an elaborate psychological operation. His goal is to get Sarah to see David for who he really is, but in a way that makes her more miserable. First, Mike creates a fake social media account using a name that sounds like David's ex-girlfriend. He begins sending David private messages pretending to be an ex-lover who wants to re-establish a relationship. David's response exceeded Mike's expectations. Not only did he respond to the messages, he showed interest in re-establishing a relationship. He even agrees to meet at a time and place unknown to Sarah. Mike arranges for Jessica to follow up on the meeting and record a conversation between David and the fake ex-girlfriend, who is actually one of Jessica's co-workers. In this conversation, David admits that he has some complicated personal circumstances at the moment, but is interested in exploring new possibilities. When Jessica's coworker inquires about these complications, David explains that he is currently involved with a woman who is going through marital difficulties, but that he is not sure if this is a long-term solution. Mike has the recording he needs. David is betraying Sarah, just as Sarah is betraying Mike. But Mike doesn't show this recording to Sarah right away. Instead, he begins a more subtle game. Mike begins to leave clues around the house that make Sarah question David's loyalty. He would occasionally mention that he had heard that David was with other women, or that he had seen David in places that Sarah didn't know about. At first, Sarah ignored these hints, but as they accumulate, she becomes suspicious. Mike discovers through his surveillance equipment that Sarah is beginning to question David about his whereabouts at certain times. David's answers become increasingly evasive, which only increases Sarah's suspicions. Meanwhile, Mike begins to execute the third phase of his plan preparations. He contacts an attorney who specializes in high-conflict divorces, Jennifer Walsh. Jennifer has a reputation for fighting for her clients' best interests in cases involving infidelity and asset concealment. "The evidence you've gathered is very comprehensive," Jennifer said after reviewing Mike's documents. "In this case, the court will likely give you most of the marital property." "I don't just want the property," Mike said. "I want to make sure she can't hide her behavior." Jennifer explains the various legal options. In their state, infidelity is a relevant factor in divorce proceedings and can affect property division and alimony decisions. But more importantly, Sarah's misuse of marital assets could constitute waste of marital property, which could result in her needing to repay those funds. Mike begins to calculate the amount of money Sarah will have to repay. According to his records, she had paid over $8,000 for David-related expenses in the past 6 months. This includes restaurant bills, hotel rooms, gifts, and even some of David's personal debts. But Mike wants more than financial compensation. He wanted to publicly humiliate Sarah and show her friends and family who she really was. In mid-December, Mike decided to embark on the final phase of his plan. He chose Sarah's annual company holiday party as the occasion for the revelation. The party will be attended by Sarah's coworkers, friends, and some family members, including her parents. But before the revelation, Mike wants to give Sarah one last chance to prove her betrayal. Mike begins to hint that he knows something. His approach is subtle, but it's enough to give Sarah pause. "I've been thinking a lot about our relationship lately," Mike says one weekend morning. They were sitting in the kitchen, Sarah reading the paper and Mike drinking coffee. Sarah looked up with a wary expression. "What do you mean?" "I think there's some distance between us," Mike said. "I want to know if there's something I don't know." Sarah's face turned pale. "I don't understand what you're saying." "Maybe I'm wrong," Mike said, "but I think you're hiding something." Sarah put down the paper and looked directly at Mike. "What makes you think that?" "Just a feeling," Mike replied. "You've been acting strange lately. More outings, more secret phone calls, more new clothes." Sarah tried to stay calm, but Mike could see her nervousness. "I'm not hiding anything," she said. "I'm just trying to focus more on myself." "That's good," Mike said. "I just want to make sure we're being honest with each other." The conversation had the effect Mike expected. Sarah began to act more nervous, and her communication with David became more cautious. But that caution also made them more suspicious. Mike realizes through his surveillance equipment that Sarah is beginning to question David about Mike's concerns. She asks David if they should be more careful or if they need to split up for a while. David's response is typically evasive. "We just need to be smart." There's always going to be some tense moments with these things. But Mike also found out some more interesting information. David had recently been in contact with another woman, a young assistant professor working at the university. Their sources indicate that David is interested in this new woman, and he even hints that he may soon have some personal life changes. Mike realizes that David is ready to dump Sarah, just as he dumped his ex-wife and ex-girlfriend. This gave Mike the perfect opportunity. Mike decides to accelerate his schedule. He won't wait until the holiday party. He'll make his move much earlier. On December 15th, Mike implemented his final plan. It was a Friday, and Sarah told Mike that she would be going out with friends for a ladies' night. Mike knew it was another lie and that she was actually going to meet David. Mike asks Tommy to go along with his plan. Tommy, now 16, is totally supportive of his father and angry at his mother's betrayal. "What are we going to do?" Tommy asks. "We're going to surprise your mom," Mike replies. Mike and Tommy drive to David's apartment. Jessica has confirmed that Sarah and David are there, and they plan to spend the entire evening there. Mike does not storm the apartment. Instead, he implements a more elaborate plan. He waits downstairs in David's apartment, using professional-grade listening devices to record conversations inside the apartment. Meanwhile, Jessica was on the other side of the building, using a telephoto lens to capture activity inside the windows. They waited for 2 hours and recorded Sarah and David throughout the evening. The recordings show their intimate conversations, including Sarah's complaints about Mike and discussions about their future plans. But most importantly, Mike recorded a key conversation. "I want to leave Mike," Sarah says. "I'm tired of this double life." "I understand," David replies. "But we need to be careful. Divorce is complicated, especially when it comes to property division. Will you stay with me?" Sarah asked. "When it's all over?" David's answer was evasive. "We need to see how things play out." Sarah presses on. "Do you love me?" "Of course," David replies, but his tone lacks real emotion. Mike continues to record until he hears the crucial information he needs. "I need to tell you something," David said. "My work situation may change." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. "I may need to move to another city. The university hasn't renewed my contract." Sarah's voice became strained. "When?" "Probably after the new year." "I can come with you." David's reply was a long silence. Then, "We'll need to see." Mike knew David was preparing to dump Sarah. He was looking for a way to end the relationship without having to deal with the complications of divorce. But Mike wouldn't give him that chance. The next day, Mike began the final phase of his plan. He begins by contacting Sarah's parents and inviting them over for Sunday dinner. Then he invites some of Sarah's friends and co-workers, claiming that he wants to throw a surprise party for Sarah. Sarah is confused by the surprise party, but she can't say no because she doesn't want to seem suspicious. On Sunday night, when all the guests have arrived, Mike begins his final push. "I want to share something with you all," Mike said, standing in the center of the living room. The conversation in the room stops, and everyone turns to Mike. "This is a special gathering," Mike continued. "It's a truth party." Sarah's expression becomes wary as she sits on the couch, looking like she's ready to run away. "I recently found out something interesting about my wife," Mike said. "I wanted to share it with everyone." He walked over to the TV and connected his laptop. "For the past 6 months, Sarah has been in a secret relationship with another man," Mike said. The room rang with surprise. The first picture appeared on the screen, Sarah and David in a restaurant, their hands clasped on the table. "This is David Chun," Mike said. "He works at the local university." More photos appeared, showing Sarah and David in various intimate settings. Then Mike played some recordings of Sarah and David discussing their relationship, their opinions of Mike, and their future plans. People in the room start to talk to each other. Sarah's parents look shocked, and her friends look embarrassed. "But that's not all," Mike continued. "I also found out some information about how Sarah was supporting the relationship with our family funds." Bank records and credit card statements appeared on the screen showing the thousands of dollars Sarah had paid for David-related expenses. "Sarah has been using our joint assets to pay for her affair," Mike said. "This isn't just emotional betrayal. This is financial betrayal." Sarah stands up and tries to speak, but Mike stops her. "I'm not done yet," Mike said. "I want everyone to hear what Sarah said last night." Mike played the recording he had made at David's apartment. Sarah's voice fills the room as she expresses her disgust for Mike, her desire to leave him, and her hopes for a future with David. But the most devastating part of the recording was what came next. "I want everyone to hear how David Chin responded to Sarah's love and commitment," Mike said. He played a recording of David's conversation with Jessica's co-worker, in which David admitted that he was unsure about Sarah's relationship and that he was interested in exploring new possibilities. People in the room begin to understand the complexity of the situation. Not only has Sarah betrayed her husband, she has also been cheated on by her lover. Sarah's face turns pale, and she begins to cry. "It's not true," she says. "It's not true. These are made up." "Really?" Mike asked. "Then can you explain this?" The bank records of Sarah's transfers from her home account to David appeared on the screen. "Or this," Mike continued, showing a breakdown of the expenses Sarah had paid for David on the family credit card. "Or this." Mike showed a log of Sarah and David's text messages showing their intimate conversations and arrangements to meet. People in the room began to understand the overwhelming nature of the evidence. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding or mistake. This was a systematic betrayal. Sarah's mother stood up and looked like she was going to vomit. "I can't believe this is true," she says. "Neither can I," Mike replies. "But the evidence is incontrovertible." Sarah tried to defend herself. "Mike, let me explain. It's not what you think it is." "It's not?" Mike asked. "Then how do you explain this?" He played the recording of Sarah saying she was tired of this double life and wanted to leave Mike. "Does that sound like a woman who wants to save her marriage?" Mike asked the people in the room. No one answered. Sarah's friends begin to leave, one by one, making excuses to get out of the embarrassing scene. Sarah's parents were also ready to leave, but they approached Mike first. "We're so sorry," said Sarah's father. "We didn't know what she was doing." "I know you didn't know," Mike replied. "Sarah is a very good liar." Sarah's mother turned to her daughter. "I'm ashamed of you," she said. "How could you do this to Mike?" Sarah couldn't answer. She sat on the couch, crying, overwhelmed by the consequences of her own actions. Eventually, only Mike, Sarah, and Tommy remained in the room. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Now you suffer the consequences," Mike replies. "Tomorrow I will file the divorce papers." "Mike, please," Sarah begins. "No," Mike interrupted her. "You made your choice. Now I made my choice." He turned to Tommy. "Go pack your stuff. We're staying at the hotel tonight." Mike and Tommy left the house, leaving Sarah alone to face the consequences of her actions. The next few months were a time of legal proceedings. Jennifer Walsh represented Mike and made sure he got the most out of the divorce. Due to Sarah's infidelity and her misuse of marital property, the court awarded Mike the house and most of the assets. Sarah was ordered to reimburse all of the expenses she had paid on David's behalf, totaling more than $10,000. She was also ordered to pay Mike's legal fees. But for Mike, the greatest satisfaction wasn't the financial victory. It was seeing the complete collapse of Sarah's social and professional life. Sarah's friends alienate her. Her parents refused to speak to her. Her employer, the local community college, did not renew her contract after learning of her personal behavioral issues. As for David Chun, he did move to another city, but not because of a job offer. His employer discovered a pattern of inappropriate relationships with students and employees' families and terminated his employment. He now works in a smaller city for a meager income. More importantly, David has never honored any of his commitments to Sarah. When Sarah contacted him about getting together, he refused, claiming that their relationship was too complicated. Sarah now lives alone in a small apartment, working part-time and trying to pay her legal debts. She has tried repeatedly to contact Mike to ask for forgiveness or reconciliation, but Mike never responds. Mike and Tommy moved to another part of the city and started a new life. Mike got a better job at a bigger engineering firm, and Tommy excelled at his new school. A year later, Mike happened to run into one of Sarah's ex-friends, Linda. "How's Sarah doing?" Mike asks, not out of concern, but out of curiosity. "Not so good," Linda replies. "She lost almost all of her friends, and her family still doesn't talk to her. She works at a small accounting firm and makes just enough money to cover her expenses." Mike nodded. "What about David?" She said she never heard from him again. "He disappeared completely." Mike felt no sympathy. Sarah got what she deserved. A few months later, Mike started dating. He met a woman named Rachel, a divorced nurse with a daughter. Rachel is honest, kind, and completely different from Sarah. Mike and Rachel's relationship develops slowly and is built on trust and mutual respect. Tommy also likes Rachel, her daughter Emma. 2 years later, Mike and Rachel were married. It was a small ceremony, attended only by close friends and family. Sarah, of course, was not invited. At the wedding, Mike's friends asked him if he felt his revenge had been successful. "It's not revenge," Mike replied. "It's justice." Mike learned an important lesson. When someone betrays you, the best response is not an angry outburst, but systematic, calculated action. He took the time to gather evidence, formulate a plan, and then execute it with precision. Sarah lost her husband, her home, her friends, her job, and her dignity. Her lover abandoned her. Her family rejected her. She now lives alone with the consequences of her choices. Mike now has a new wife, a new family, a new life. He's successful, he's happy, and he gets the respect he deserves. Justice has been served. Sarah's betrayal got the response it deserved. Mike's patience and planning paid off. This is the price of betrayal. This is the power of justice. This is the story of how a man asserts his dignity and worth in the face of betrayal. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.